Secret Wars movie event would eclipse ambition of Infinity Saga, teases Russo brothers. This is coming from MovieWeb. This is written by Kevin Berwick. I'm Adam Post. We're going to get into this article, but we're going to do it a little different. We're going to talk about the history first of Secret Wars because this inspired me in comics to publish, and then 9 years later, I was publishing my own freaking comic book universe. It was amazing. First, if you want to support my work, collegeofthedead.com, where college costs you an arm and a leg. Oh, it's a zombie joke. Yeah, but it's actually a serious book, and it's really well done. I love my creative team that I collaborated with to produce this, and this is what's great about producing comics. You don't have to do it all yourself. You can do it with a team. The Mermaids. This is an upcoming series. This is at epicmermaids.com. You sign up for it, you get an email. It's free. It tells you when we're going to launch it. It's Game of Thrones with mermaids. It is my kind of return to comics. I started working on it. It's a self-contained fantasy universe. It's fantastic. I love it. We'll get into it another day. The article in MovieWeb is talking about Secret Wars, but I'm going to break the rules and talk first about the history of Secret Wars. Jim Shooter, who inspired me like a whole bunch of ways, did this great article on Secret Wars on his own website, jimshooter.com. I definitely recommend it if you're interested in comics history, Marvel history, and learning about writing and editorial and characterization. So freaking cool. Very cool content on jimshooter.com. So we're going to just straight up do his background of how Secret Wars first came to be, and then we'll talk about the article. The road that led to Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars actually began when Kenner Toys licensed the DC Universe for a boys action figure line. Their competitor, remember when there was a boys action figure line back in the day? Anyway, their competitor, Mattel, already had their He-Man license and the action figure line, which was doing very well, but wanted to hedge the bet in case comic book character action figures became the rage. So they were trying to just like make sure, all right, the boy market's a big successful market. We want to make sure this is under control. If that becomes hot, we want those toys. So they came to Marvel to talk about licensing our characters. One thing they demanded of us was an event, a special publication or series to help launch the toy line. That hadn't been done in comics before. To support toys, there had been no real event publishing in comics. An event would be the comics come out on time, they're as good as they can possibly be, and then they would occasionally launch a new #1, but they weren't even doing limited series as an event at that time. It wasn't like, oh, 4-issue Machine Man, whatever, or 4-issue Wolverine series. That event publishing really was, in comics, was created with Secret Wars for these toys. There was event publishing in books before that time, but not in comics yet. So it's fascinating history. It's interesting to see where things come from and like what's successful and why it's successful. Then Jim goes on to say, I offered an idea that was suggested by a dozen or so correspondents, usually younger ones, in the fan mail every day. One big epic story with all or many of the heroes and villains on it. Everyone agreed. We went through a number of ideas for names for the toy line and series. Mattel's focus group tests indicated that kids reacted positively to the words Wars and Secret. Okay. Mattel had a number of other requirements. Dr. Doom, they said, looked too medieval. His armor would have to be made more high-tech. So would Iron Man's, because their focus groups indicated that kids reacted positively to, etc. Okay, you got it. They also said there had to be new fortresses, vehicles, and weapons because they wanted play sets, higher price point merchandise, and additional play value. Okay, you got it. So that's what they did. But that's also how the editorial was then planned. And it was executed well. Everyone loved Secret Wars back in the day. When time came to actually do it, I realized that only I could write it. Sounds egotistical, but wait a minute. Listen to what he's talking about. I was busy enough being editor-in-chief. I didn't need the additional burden to write it, and we didn't have a shortage of writers. However, Marvel's writers at the time, some of the best in the business, were, to a person, very possessive about the characters they were writing. To some extent, that was a good thing, indicating a love for the characters that generally showed in their work. It also led to some intense rivalries and bitter arguments regarding crossovers and guest appearances. For instance, once writer A, who shall remain nameless, wanted Doctor Doom to guest villain in the series he wrote, I okayed it over the snarling objections of writer B, who wrote the series in which Doom usually appeared. Sounds a little... we kind of know maybe who some of these people are, but that's another side story. I would not allow the Marvel Universe to be divided into fiefdoms, meaning he wouldn't say, like, well, only this character can be in this book, only this villain can be in this universe, or this mini-universe of the Spider World or whatever it was. But then writer B wrote a story proving that the Doom seen in writer A's series was a robot, the intimation being that the real Doctor Doom wouldn't behave so stupidly. Somehow, obviously, it really annoys people and is an insult to the writer. Somehow, writer B's editor didn't realize what he was up to and let it slip past. Writer A was furious. One of the things Jim used to say was that he wouldn't read like all of the scripts. That was the job of the editor. He would read the comics after they were published often, so that's how sometimes this stuff slipped through. And it wasn't because... it was because people were supposed to have delegated responsibilities, and that's like how you organize your editorial when you're serious about producing a lot of books and also giving people creative freedom, but at the same time holding everyone involved accountable to do good stuff. But obviously he didn't really want people doing this robot trick, and there's fights and all this other stuff. Allowing any one of the writers to handle pretty much everyone else's characters in Secret Wars, contemplated to be the biggest, most continuity-intensive crossover ever done, would have led to bloodshed in the hallowed halls. Easily, and people were still mad about it back then. There's other side stories. So I wrote it. As editor-in-chief, by definition, I was the company's designated keeper of the franchises. That would be like the chief creative officer, right? And the ordained absolute authority on the characters. All part of the job, at least all back then. The writers could and did argue with me, and on some occasions talk me into their point of view regarding what Thor, Spider-Man, or the X-Men would do, say, in a given situation. But ultimately, it was my call. That made things a little easier and less bloody, and because I had the best overview of what was going on in all of the titles, working closely with the line editors and writers, I was able to keep continuity tight. So as editor-in-chief, even though he didn't read every bit of every piece of everything until the books were published, he at least had the best overview of what the past was, the current plans and future plans of all the characters, all the stories. I mean, all the comics all together. Like, yes, if he's capable of writing, and he's very capable of writing, he would be the only person to write this. And with their help, I think we managed to work things in Mattel asked for in ways that made sense and enhanced the story. They did. It was good, Jim. Yeah, this is back when continuity was a thing, meaning that when something happened in one book, it was remembered as like the story of the world. And people have long since given up on that in producing their comics. And it's hard to explain to people if you're not familiar with like strict continuity and the accomplishments of that and the value that it adds to our stories and our storytelling. We did it in Triumphant Comics when I launched the comic universe with CHROMIUM MAN and Scavengers and a number of other characters. We had over 140 characters. Continuity was a big thing back then. And it wasn't trivial, and it added a lot of value that people understood that one thing happened and then another thing happened and it impacted something else, and it wasn't all forgotten. Not that every event always affected every other event, but it wasn't forgotten like the story meant nothing to the overall ongoing story. Continuity is fascinating. It takes a lot of work to track, a lot of discipline, and everybody has to sign up to really want to do it. I haven't seen it done in a very, very long time, and we ought to really bring it back. It's amazing. It's a great part of publishing comics. It's like adding color to black and white comics. It adds a whole other actual level to the enjoyment of the content and the story. It just takes tremendous editorial discipline, vision, and commitment of the creative teams to execute it. Secret Wars was the first mega crossover. It was incredibly successful. Afterward, mega crossovers became a staple of comic book publishing. Yes, absolutely, it's true. For me, it was even one of the most difficult and yet enjoyable things I've ever done. To this day, when I go to conventions, I'm asked to sign many, many copies. Can you imagine that people are bringing you books from over like, 30, 35 years old and like, hey, could you sign this? I really loved it when I was a kid, and you're talking to some freaking 50-year-old guy like me. To this day, when I go to conventions, I just love this. I'm asked to sign many and many copies. Lots of people tell me that Secret Wars is what first got them into comics. It makes sense. The idea came from the fans. I'm proud to have been a part of it. Yeah, I mean, the fans created it. The fans create everything, and if we listen to the fans, we can really, really produce great comics. You can't do everything the fans ask for, because they even ask for things that conflict, and they also don't necessarily make sense in terms of storytelling, but you can certainly incorporate it, and when things are really passionate and they keep coming up, that is something worth paying attention to. Secret Wars movie event. Okay, the Secret Wars movie event is like this. The Russo brothers say, when I read Secret Wars when I was 10 or 11, and it was a scale of getting all the heroes together, it was one of the first major books to do that. That was really event storytelling to me at its finest, and what happens when you put those personalities together. I also like the idea of villains having to team up with heroes. Anth and I like complicated relationships between heroes and villains. We like heroes who believe they're heroes in their own stories, so it's all sort of built into this notion of Secret Wars. Side note, yes, Jim Shooter announced in his storytelling lecture that his view, this is going back to the early 1990s, his view was that every villain was a hero in their own story, and that made them interesting. So it's not a matter of like, well, this guy is just bad, he does bad things. It's like, yeah, he does bad things, but in his mind, it's for good reasons, for whatever he thinks is good. It's like what Magneto does in X-Men, or at least used to do. God knows what Magneto does now. He's anyway, it's another whole story. To execute something on this scale of Infinity War was directly related to the dream of Secret Wars, which is even larger in scale. Well, of course, because there's no Secret Wars that Jim Shooter did back in the day. There would have been no Infinity War. It would be the biggest movie you could possibly imagine, so that's really what excites us about the story, the ambition of it, even bigger than the ambition of Infinity Saga. Call Jim Shooter and start working on a story. I mean, that's what people should be doing. Shooter is an amazing guy. He does amazing work, and he hasn't done much in comics lately, but he is still around, and hopefully he comes back soon. Again, if you want to support my work, collegeofthedead.com. Love this book. It came out great. It's full color, 48 pages. It's shipping immediately. It tells the story of students trying to survive a zombie apocalypse on campus. And it's where college costs you an arm and a leg. Can't go wrong with that. Also, sign up for epicmermaids.com. It is The Mermaids, a full color ongoing series. It's like Game of Thrones with mermaids. It's this self-contained small fantasy universe that actually does have very tight continuity. And it's really well done. I really liked working with the creative team on it and collaborating and getting that stuff done. I will see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.